Started. Okay, so music. I imagine all of us are connected in some way to music, different styles of music. I imagine we could go around the room, all of us are inspired or connected to different types of music. I'll just share something personally. And that is that growing up, I didn't necessarily listen to exclusively Jewish music. I like music. And Jewish music was a little bit bland, to say it most nicely. It was pretty bland. There was usually one pasuk, one verse that they would repeat over and over again. Verse, chorus, key change, verse, chorus, and it wasn't all that exciting. And there came a point in my life where I really wanted to only listen to Jewish music, and the problem was there was no music to listen to. It was mostly lousy music. Okay, you could listen to classical music. I wasn't interested so much in learning and listening to non-Jewish music at the time, and so basically what I did by default was basically not listen to any music. And really for decades, I didn't listen to music. And anyone who knows me, that would seem like so depressing, right? So I think, anyone who comes here to show, like, we love singing, we love davening with heartfelt music, and to not have music just seemed so incredibly sad, but there was simply, in my perspective, no option. And then, about let's say 7 or so years ago, 7 years ago, all of a sudden there was like a trickle of music coming in from Israel. My brother who lives in Israel started sending me some songs, and I started listening to this. I was like, this is incredible. There are people that at the time were not known. Yishai Ribo, I remember listening to Yishai Ribo before anyone knew, not anyone, but before many people knew who he was. And I remember driving my kids to school, and they would say, Abba, when we pull up to school, you got to turn off the music because we're embarrassed of your weird Israeli music. Okay? And then about like 2020, all of a sudden, like, Abba, crank it up. We're the cool people. We're listening to the cool. So at one point, it kind of became well known in America, but there are people like Yishai Ribo, who is probably the most famous, Hanan Ben Ari, another individual, and really a number of people, Akiva, and there's so many other individuals who have been putting out really heartfelt music that really pulls on the heartstrings, just beautiful tunes, catchy tunes, but also lyrics that are deep, that are profound, that capture so many of the emotions that we're experiencing, and also very many of them drawing on our rich tradition. So specifically, Yishai Ribo, who we're going to focus on first, is an individual who many people describe not just as a songwriter, but as a paitan. A paitan is a term that really fell into disuse. If anyone sings Shabbos Zmiros, you find these beautiful, beautiful songs that are written by some of our leading scholars, some of our leading teachers. Nowadays, I'm not familiar with any of the leading Torah scholars writing music. They're actually, one of the exceptions, is the name of our shul. The words that are found on the top of our bima, it was actually written by, anyone know who? A rabbi, very good. It was written by Rav Yitzchak Hutner, who was one of the most profound thinkers of the second half of the 20th century. And what he did is very much what Yishai Ribo does. He actually, there was a piyut, there was a beautiful song, a poem that was written in the 15th century. The same individual who wrote Yedid Nefesh wrote a piyut which spoke about a heart and used some of the themes, and Rav Yitzchak Hutner came along and developed those themes further, put it to tune, and the very famous song, Bilvavi Mishkan Evne, was written by Rav Hutner, both the words and the tune, but drawing upon ancient piyut, ancient poetry, and kind of bringing it to a more, modern stage. I just said Rav, but Yishai Ribo, in many ways, although he's not certainly a scholar of the scale of Rav Yitzchak Hutner, is someone who has a very decent grasp of Jewish knowledge of Torah and of ancient piyut. And what he's done many times is taken from these ancient piyutim, from these ancient poems or ancient tfilos, and kind of morph them, adapt them to the modern times in many of his songs. Before we jump into this one song, I just want to share an idea which I saw and really resonated with me, and hopefully we'll see it through. And that is at the end of Orot HaTeshuvah, Avram Yitzchak Kook, the famous first chief rabbi of what was then Palestine, wrote one of his most famous books, one of his most important books, is a book on repentance, and he just blows wide the notion of repentance from this hunched over feeling of knocking ourselves over the chest to this beautiful, brilliant way of life. It's the most poetic, inspiring book, all about how we could change, and he finishes the book in a very, very odd way. He finishes the book describing a messianic era. So much of the book is about paving the way for Mashiach, and there he says, in the the penultimate paragraph, he says, what is ultimately going to lead the way to Mashiach is a poet. is poetry, is the ability to have song that opens our hearts. Because so often when we just focus on the prose, when we just focus on the words and the text, and as beautiful and rich as our tradition is, it doesn't capture our entire essence the way that music does. And he says to really lead the way, to really open our hearts, to get to the stage where we're ready to reach Mashiach, we need to have a paitan, an individual who is going to write the music that opens us up to allow us to pave the way, to be able to receive the Torah, to receive the Messianic light, the Messianic era. And in my, Rav Yishai Ribo is certainly up there leading the way and opening our hearts, and not just our hearts, as we'll talk about a little bit more, not just the hearts of perhaps people who are consider themselves observant, but so many opening their hearts to, again, not just the words, but the music, the uplift, the spirituality that is found in our tradition.
I was just going to add to what you just said, which is to go to Yishai Ribo concert. I think what really makes him special is how he's transformed or transcended the niche of religious music.
Yes.
Having been to one of his concerts.
Correct. So you'll find something, and we'll see a little bit about that in the videos we're going to see, and that is that in Israel, there's one music critic. I read an article a little while ago said that over the past 5 years, God has become a superstar, like a pop star. In other words, like God is now and that means like in all the radio channels, we'll see the final song we'll listen to is the number one song in Israel right now, which, as you'll see from the video itself, is not even sung by someone who is an observant person. It's all about God. So it's pretty amazing. But let's jump into this song by Yishai Ribo. Let's read the lyrics first together. Now that we have a little bit of a sense of who he is, young man with a beautiful poetic heart, with a beautiful sweet voice. And this song, I'm going to really share the least commentary because it's so self-evident as to what he's getting at that it doesn't need so much commentary. The reason I choose this song is because what I'm hoping to focus on today is some of the different emotions that the people of Israel are experiencing. And it's impossible, so on my way here, someone asked me, are we going to talk about this song? Another person asked me, are we going to talk about that song? It's impossible to summarize all the emotions that people are feeling, but these are some of the most, in my opinion, the salient emotions. And so we'll see 3 very different songs with very different emotions. And this one was one of the earliest songs to be written by Yishai Ribo. It was almost like people were waiting for him to write a song. I don't know if you remember in 2020 when COVID came about, the first person to put out a COVID song was Yishai Ribo, a beautiful song called Keter Melucha. I'm not going to get into that song right now, but it was a song that almost captured so many of our feelings, and so people were like, when's Yishai Ribo going to put up a song to capture our emotions? And he does, I think, very poetically and beautifully. It's a soft song. Let's read it together, and I'll explain just a little bit. Again, the song itself is almost self-explanatory, but it'll give us a sense of what's going on, and then we'll get a chance to listen to the song for those who are not familiar. So he writes, Kol Hadmaot, we're on the last page, it's out of order actually, okay? So on the final page, I'm sorry, I don't know how that happened. Porchim L'shuvam by Yishai Ribo. You see that, the final page? Okay. Kol Hadmaot HaKe'ev Shebaku Me'alev. All the tears of pain that burst from the heart. Od Yatzmichu Olam. Will sprout a world. Okay, actually, for those of you who were in Shul yesterday, this is in many ways what I was alluding to in the discussion of the pre-Messianic era. There is this notion that the Kabbalists discuss, and that is that somehow, without getting into all the why and how this works, but somehow from a mystical perspective, to transition from this natural world to a world of brilliant Messianic light is too much of a gap. And so sometimes you need to have something that kind of gets us there, and sometimes that something is pain. How that works, why that works, beyond our discussion right now. But this is an idea, a concept you find throughout, all the way back to the Talmud, a notion called Chevlei Mashiach, literally the birth pangs of Mashiach. The same way that when a woman gives birth to a child, and they, there's pain, right? There's birth pangs, and then you have the child, right? So similarly, the idea is Mashiach is the birth of a new world, and in order for that world to come into being, you need to have, for whatever reason, in God's cosmic plan, there needs to be this pain, okay? So he says, all the tears of pain that burst from the heart will sprout a world. To recognize that, yes, we're feeling so much pain. Again, he was writing this not too long after October 7th. I forgot the exact date. He says, recognize that the pain that burst forth at that moment, the incredible pain that burst forth, will ultimately sprout forth a beautiful new world. Orchard fields of truth, wildflowers and almonds will bloom for their return. Yifarchu L'shuvam means that they will bloom, L'shuvam meaning like beckoning the return of those who were taken hostage, right? So this song is both focusing on the pain that people felt and the new world that is going to emanate, but also speaking about the fact that they were at the time 200 and whatever it was, 51 hostages or so that were taken, and there's this field, this new growth that is going to take place that is blooming towards their return, blooming and beckoning their return. Okay, that's actually the chorus of the song, and then he begins. All that we experience, we made mistakes on the way. Now, this is a very apparent idea. This is something which was focused on by everyone in Israel. The recognition that the military, the security apparatus, made some grievous mistakes. The fact that they allowed this to happen, the fact that they ignored all the signs, was a telltale sign. That there was some significant failure. Right? We know that many people are resigning now from the army. So we made many mistakes on the way. But in the end, we learned that we can't do it alone. And the message, the ultimate message was, though, that yes, we made mistakes. But if we're just going to focus on the fact that, look, the IDF made this mistake and the Shin Bet made that mistake, then we're missing the moral message over here. Yes, that's true. There has to be a reckoning, and there's going to be, a lot of much time and effort spent trying to figure out exactly what went wrong, and people are working on that. But he's writing from the perspective we're not just watching the news. We are growth-oriented people. We are believers in God. So what is the message for us? What is the message for the regular individual? Not for the IDF. The message for us is that we need God, that we can't do it alone. Yes, it's true the IDF made a mistake, but that can't be our takeaway. If that's only our takeaway, then what do we learn from this? We learn nothing. What, the IDF makes mistakes? Okay. That's a big deal. Don't get me wrong. But the point is, how is this relevant to us? So again, as a poet, as someone who's trying to give direction to us, trying to awaken us in a very personal and practical way, his message is, yes, they made mistakes, but how's it impacting us? To recognize that ultimately this makes no sense. It makes no sense that this incredibly sophisticated, incredible surveillance failed miserably. It only makes sense if we understand that someone else is in control. And that was a message that became evident to so many.
Isn't this like Tehillim?
This is very much like Tehillim. He writes like a pait. Correct. Absolutely. Everything we knew. Kol mashi yadanu, everything we knew. Hisparer shelo yadanu. It turned out that we did not know, right? There was this incredible humility that encompassed the people of Israel at this moment, and still is. This recognition that we don't know. We think we know, but when something so earth-shattering happens, sometimes when we are, something happens to us, we could double down and get very much, focused on what we believe and just double down on that. Or alternatively, when something big happens, whether it's personal or collective, the idea is to recognize there are things I missed, there are things I don't know. One of the previous Rosh Yeshivas of Ner Israel, Rav Yaakov Weinberg, a very important thinker, used to tell his students, used to say, like, if something is happening in the world, if something big is happening in the world, and you say, and the takeaway from this very big thing is something that you knew already, then you're deaf. Right? You see this all the time, right? When something crazy happens, like, oh, look, it just shows everything I believed in. Well, then why would God want you to hear this? Why is this message coming to you? If we are growth-oriented people and everything that happens around us is simply affirming what we already knew, what a waste. What a waste, right? So when something like this happens, everything we knew, it turned out we did not know. There has to be a humility to recognize, to second guess, to think that, yes, I think I know, X, Y, Z. I think I understand the dynamics of my relationship with my family, with God, with myself. No. To recognize that what we thought we knew, when something this earth-shattering happens, for any of us to live through such a time and not walk away different, not walk away with a reoriented way of thinking, how could that be? So everything we knew, it turned out we did not know. Ve'ech miyom simchatenu, and how could it be? From the day of our joy, meaning he's referring to Simchas Torah, ein lanu rega dal. We don't have a dull moment. Perhaps it's also a way of saying there's not a poor moment. In other words, what he's getting at over here, dal means dal from the word dull. They don't have another word for dull. We used to have a teacher in I went to a quasi-Israeli yeshiva, and every once in a while he'd pull out like this big word, and he'd be like, oh, atem yodim hazeh elektronika. He'd be like, it's a big word. Do you know what it means, elektronika? Because it sounds like a big word. We're like, yeah, it's an English word, my friend. Okay, so dal is actually dull. Okay, that's the simple word, but dal in Aramaic actually means poor. And what he's getting at over here is that we haven't had a dull moment, but we also haven't had a spiritually poor moment. Since October 7th, the entire nation, remember that? The entire nation mobilized. Everyone's running to bring food to the soldiers. Everyone's looking out for one another. It's incredible. The chesed, not just there, here too, right? You remember, it wasn't that long ago. It seems like a different world, but remember like what people were doing, right? Since that moment, there hasn't been a dull moments, but there also hasn't been a spiritually poor moment because people were mobilized. People actually stepped up to the challenge, okay? Then he goes back. He says, the morning of Shmini, Boker Shmini Atzeret, the morning of Shmini Atzeres, Bo Hazman Atzar Milechet. He's playing on the words Shmini Atzeret. The word Atzeret does mean to stop, and he says time stopped on that day, okay? Shoalim chiblu kerem. Foxes destroyed a vineyard. A vineyard is a term that the prophets continuously use. Specifically, Isaiah, Yeshaya uses to describe the Jewish people, and the land of Israel is a vineyard, and therefore there's this idea of foxes. Foxes is also a term that the prophets use to describe our enemies. So foxes destroyed the vineyard. Again, putting the story in its religious and historical context, recognizing this is an old story in some respects, right? This is the foxes, this is the vineyard, this is in some ways a cycle of sorts, okay?
Excuse me, is this like the Rabbi Akiva position? We know the Mashiach will come because
It is probably alluding, yes, excellent. So as Rabbi Epstein is pointing out, it also alludes to the notion of the foxes at the end of Meseches Makos. We find this very somewhat famous episode where Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues are walking, and they see foxes walking over the Temple Mount, and everyone's crying how terrible it is. And Rabbi Akiva is awakened. Rabbi Akiva is heartened because of it's a complex way of learning this, but ultimately he infers from some verses that when foxes are going to run over the Temple Mount, that's also a sign of the heralding of the Messianic era. So perhaps also a reference to those foxes as well, and very much on brand with Ishay Ribo trying to kind of elevate us, right? Shualim chiblu kerem lakhu haguf. It should be a hay over here, I believe. Lakhu haguf achlo hatzelem. They took our bodies, but they didn't take hatzelem. What is tzelem a reference to? Tzelem Elokim. They took our bodies, they destroyed us, but we didn't lose our, war brings out the worst in people. War brings out a person's, viciousness and a person fighting back with a terror, right? Although they took our body, although they fought us, we never lost our divine image. There's such Jewish pride over here in the sense that, the IDF, it's important for us to say it, even though we know it. It is the most humane army that has ever existed in all of human history, right? With all the flaws, we could talk about the flaws. They're not perfect, don't get me wrong. But the steps that they take to go ahead and warn, and the steps that they take to go ahead and to mitigate what could otherwise be much more, and again, we could talk about their mistakes, but the notion of the nation as a nation, we did not lose Hatzelem, we did not lose our divine image. And in the shock that we're in, Hirbanu Tov, Higdalnu Chesed, we increased goodness, we increased kindness, Gam Barzel v'Gam Cherev, both iron and sword, that's the name of the war, but also sword is found in Talmudic literature as a reference, Midrashic literature, as a reference to when Yaakov says that he conquered the city of Shechem, he says, Becharbi uvekashti, I conquered it with my sword and my arrow, and our sages say that a sword is a reference to prayer. It's a reference to spiritual deeds, that as Jews we fight with our swords, but we also fight with our spirituality, and that's why in the next line he says, V'tfilot b'beit HaKnesset. And there's also prayers in the synagogue. He juxtaposes the two, because as Jews, for those of you who were here yesterday, as we learned this beautiful, profound piece from Rav Kook explains that the Jewish way is not some people sometimes ask, very briefly, I'll just summarize, sometimes people ask, where do we have to believe in God, and we have to have human effort, and where do we draw the line on both, right? Sometimes people say, okay, there's what the terms people use is bitachon, I have trust in God, and hishtadlut, I have to have human effort. So where do we draw the line? At what point do I stop? And Rav Kook says, you don't stop in either. You do everything to the max. God wants us to be complete people. And when it comes to our waging war, we do everything we have to do. At the same exact time, we have full belief in God, right? We don't mitigate, we don't sacrifice one or the other. We go to war, we wage war. That is the Jewish way. And at the same time, we have full belief in God. And therefore, it's these two terms together, both iron and sword, and prayers in the synagogue, they go together because that is the way of a Jew. As certainly in Rav Kook's worldview, there isn't this notion that we are a people of, as monotheists, we believe that there is holiness and there is value not only in the spiritual world but in the physical world as well. And we need to find the ability to balance the both, and that is what this is a reference to. We fight with all our might and we pray with all our might as well. We do both, and that is our Jewish approach. Okay? And then he does something which is classic Ishay Ribo, and that is he moves on over here. He just invokes some terms. These terms should sound familiar. Hayom te'amtzenu, hayom tevarchenu, hayom tegalenu. Where are those words from? Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur davening at the end of Musaf. This is where the Chazan, the end, Hayom, everyone's like, hey, we're done. Everyone's closing their sitters. Everyone's excited. This is the end of davening. But what he's doing over here, I think, is twofold. One is, again, classic idea. He's taking old prayers and mixing them into his songs. But what he's also doing, I remember speaking to a colleague of mine right before this Rosh Hashanah. And I said, I'll share. I said, it's so hard to write a Rosh Hashanah sermons. People are supposed to be unique and different and more heavy. And I said, it's been a year of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Every day has had that intent. It's Yamim Noraim. days of awesomeness, right? The whole year was a day of awesomeness. It was just nonstop with what's going on and following the news and the fear and the joy and all of that. It's been such an intense year. It's been 1 year of awesomeness, right? And that's what he's doing over here, right? This song is written in whatever it was, November, and Hayom Tamtzenu, right? We're speaking to God as if it's Rosh Hashanah. There are shuls which are still saying Avinu Malkeinu every single day. Some shuls just stopped right now when the hostage deal just started. Rav Herschel Schechter was encouraging his students, some did, some didn't, to say Avinu Malkeinu every day, which is something we say typically during the Aseret Tshuva. We were living, and we still are living, through Yamim Noraim, awesome days. And that's where Kook is, Yishay Ribo is invoking over here by invoking that prayer, Hayom Tamtzenu, Hayom Tevarchenu, Hayom Tegadlinu, Tidushenu L'Tova, and that's how he finishes the song. Okay, so you have the basic gist of the song. This is actually one of the first times we're going to show you one of the first times. Who here has heard the song before? Okay, so we'll hear it again. Now that we have a little bit more of depth of understanding, it's one of the first times he performs the song, and so what you're going to see is something very different. If you ever go, as Rav Elliot over here mentioned, if you ever go to any Yishay Ribo song, you'll see a couple of things. One, it's the variety of the crowd. You have secular, observant, whatever, everything in between. It's like Ner Tamid. It's great. But in addition, what you have is that everyone's singing along. It's like one big kumbaya. Every few minutes he just puts the mic out and the crowd's all singing along. When he comes to America, it's a little. I feel for him because sometimes he'll put the mic out and no one knows the words. Okay, so but in Israel, everyone knows all the lyrics. Okay, but it's okay, very good. So you see over here, you don't find that. You don't find that because it's one of the first times he sings a song. But now that we have a sense of the song, let's take a moment to listen to the song and.